In 1907, a young man failed an art exam. No one knew he would one day change the world forever. Welcome to today's Explainer.
We're doing something a little different today. We're going to dive into a cinematic character study. We'll be exploring how an obscure, seemingly aimless Austrian youth somehow triggered the absolute deadliest conflict in human history. Let's look at the rise and fall of Adolf Hitler.
Section 1. The Failed Artist, From Vienna to the Trenches.
So, born in Austria, he desperately wanted to be an artist, right? But his infamous rejection from the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, well, it completely derailed him. He ended up totally broke, bouncing around homeless shelters. And it was actually right here, in Vienna's slums, that he really absorbed the fierce anti-Semitic rhetoric that would go on to define his entire life. When the First World War broke out, he actually found a sense of purpose by enlisting in the Bavarian army. But while he was recovering in a hospital from a mustard gas attack, he gets the shocking news of Germany's sudden defeat. And wow, it was a moment that radicalized him forever.
And that brings us to a really crucial psychological turning point, the Dolchstoßlegende, or the stab-in-the-back myth. You see, like a lot of shocked German nationalists at the time, he simply refused to accept that Germany was actually defeated on the battlefield. Instead, he embraced this incredibly dangerous conspiracy theory. He genuinely believed the army was betrayed back on the home front by civilian leaders, Marxists, and Jews. This myth, it provided a very convenient scapegoat, and it completely shaped the radical, hateful ideology he carried right into politics.
Section 2. Rise of the Dictator, Seizing Absolute Power.
Now, you might be wondering, how does a stateless former soldier actually take over an entire country? Well, it starts with a bit of deception. Think about the number 555. When he first joined this obscure little group called the German Workers' Party as an army spy, he was accepted as member number 555. But there was a catch. The party literally started counting at 500 just to give the illusion of being a massive movement. But as you'll see, that illusion of size quickly became a terrifying reality. Let's fast forward to March 1933. 43.9%. That is the massive surge in the Nazi Party's share of the vote. And that's up from a mere 2.6% just 5 years earlier. So what changed? Well, the Great Depression hit. He aggressively exploited all that economic desperation, the mass unemployment, and the lingering humiliation from the Treaty of Versailles. He spoke directly to a deeply frustrated middle class and very angry war veterans. Once his foot was in the door, he moved with terrifying speed to legally dismantle the Weimar Republic. It's actually wild to look back on. Conservative politicians vastly underestimated him. They appointed him chancellor thinking, hey, we can control this guy. Yeah, they were completely wrong. Following a highly suspicious arson attack on the Parliament building, he immediately pushed through the Reichstag fire decree, literally suspending basic civil rights overnight. Next came the Enabling Act, which gave his cabinet the power to completely bypass Parliament. And finally, when President Hindenburg died, he just merged the presidency with the chancellorship and declared himself Führer. In just over a single year, a fragile democracy was transformed into a totalitarian dictatorship.
Section 3. The World at War, The Path of Destruction. Now, his foreign policy played out in two very distinct phases. First, you had what looked like bloodless conquests. He basically annexed Austria and parts of Czechoslovakia through pure diplomatic blackmail. He absolutely took full advantage of Britain and France's reluctance to fight, their policy of appeasement. But then, the terrifying shift happened. In September of 1939, he launched a brutal new strategy into Poland, Blitzkrieg, or a lightning war. This devastating onslaught finally forced Britain and France to declare war. World War II had officially begun. But his absolute insatiable demand for Lebensraum, or living space, led to a massive, fatal military overreach. He completely betrayed his non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union and invaded them in the East. Then, just 6 months later, he declared war on the United States. He basically single-handedly created an unwinnable, multi-front war against the world's greatest industrial powers. By the winter of 1942, his stubborn refusal to allow tactical retreats led to the disastrous defeat of his army at Stalingrad. And by the time Allied forces landed in France on D-Day, the tide had just entirely turned against him.
Section 4. The Dictator's Mind, Absolute Authority, and Genocide.
So as his military empire really begins to crumble, we have to look inward. The absolute core of his management style was something called the Führer principle, or the leader principle. This demanded absolute, unquestioning obedience from all subordinates to their superiors. And of course, he sat right at the infallible apex of this whole pyramid.
He demanded total loyalty to consolidate his power.
But here is the crazy paradox of his leadership. He actually used that absolute authority to deliberately foster internal chaos. He purposefully pitted his subordinates against each other. Why? Well, he wanted fierce infighting, so no one could ever coordinate a threat to his position. He also rarely gave written orders, relying instead on these vague, contradictory verbal directives. As the war dragged on, he increasingly micromanaged military strategy, refusing logical retreats even when his generals were literally begging him to pull back. And adding gasoline to this fire of incompetence was his health. He exhibited highly erratic behavior, which was heavily fueled by a daily cocktail of drugs, including amphetamines and opiate.
Now, his absolute authority wasn't just used for military conquest. No, it was the horrific engine for his racist ideology. And we absolutely cannot discuss this topic without directly addressing the Holocaust. This was the deliberate, systematic genocide of an estimated 6 million Jews alongside millions of other victims that his regime deemed subhuman or socially undesirable.
To really understand how deeply central this was to his worldview, you just have to listen to his chilling words to the Reichstag. And this was months before the war even began. He said, "If the international Jewish financiers should succeed in plunging the nations once more into a world war, then the result will be the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe." He conceived it, he prophesied it, and then he used the chaotic cover of a global war to execute one of the darkest crimes in human history.
Section 5. Downfall and Death, the final days in the bunker.
So, with the entire world united against him, how did it all finally end? Well, by early 1945, Germany literally lay in ruins from relentless Allied bombing. With the Red Army completely surrounding Berlin, he retreated underground to his Führer bunker. After a massive paranoid tirade, where he finally admitted that everything was lost, he married his longtime partner, Eva Braun. The very next day, they both committed suicide to avoid capture by the Soviets.
As historians have often pointed out, with his death, the spell was instantly broken. That massive, terrifying totalitarian regime he spent his life building, it collapsed like a bubble without its leader. But it came at a virtually incomprehensible cost: the deliberate murder of millions in the Holocaust and tens of millions of military and civilian deaths right across the globe.
It leaves us with a chilling thought. How easily can a modern, educated society fall under the spell of a demagogue? It's a question that history demands we never stop asking. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.